It was supposed to be a final act of love, but the reading of the will turned into a battleground. No one could have predicted how quickly money would unravel the ties that held them together. Rain hammered the windows of the old Harris house as family members gathered in the living room, coats dripping, voices subdued. The heavy air buzzed with the awkward politeness reserved for relatives who see one another only at funerals or weddings. Old oil portraits stared down from the walls as if silently judging the parade of umbrellas and damp shoes. Evelyn Harris sat on the edge of the faded sofa, hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore her best black dress and pearls, the same set she'd worn to her father's funeral 10 years before. Now, she was here for her mother's. Around her, the room filled with a distinct sense of wet wool, old wood, and brewing coffee. Her younger brother, Stuart, paced by the window, phone glued to his hand, murmuring quick responses to work emails even as distant thunder rolled outside. Their sister, Margaret, arrived last, cheeks flushed from the cold, her husband George trailing behind with a suitcase full of paperwork and a thermos of tea. The lawyer, Mr. Brenner, entered with a leather briefcase and a folder fat with documents. He nodded to the family, his face set in solemn lines, and took a seat at the desk their mother used for Sunday crossword puzzles. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice steady but gentle. "I know this is a difficult time. Your mother left very clear instructions, and I intend to follow them exactly." Coffee was poured, tissues were passed. Old disputes surfaced in snatches of conversation. Margaret's complaints about Evelyn bossing everyone around, Stuart's reminders about how often he visited, George's subtle digs about proper estate management. Evelyn tried to tune it out, focusing on the gentle click of the grandfather clock. Mr. Brenner opened the folder. "Before I read the will, your mother requested a few words be shared." He unfolded a handwritten note, penned in their mother's unmistakable script. "To my children, I hope you remember the love we shared in this house, not just the things I leave behind. I have tried to be fair. Take care of each other." Silence followed, broken only by the shuffling of feet and the nervous clearing of throats. The will itself was detailed, down to the last teaspoon and oil painting. The house, appraised at nearly $1 million, was to be divided evenly among the children. Bank accounts, stocks, family jewelry, every item carefully listed. Margaret leaned forward, brow furrowed, scribbling notes. Stuart, eyes flicking between the lawyer and his phone, asked pointed questions about appraisals and taxes. When the section on the family cottage was read, voices rose. "That place should go to someone who'll actually use it," Margaret argued, her voice brittle. "Don't start," Evelyn replied, tension sharpening her words. "We all loved that place." Stuart chimed in, "I can't believe you think you deserve it more than the rest of us. I'm the one who took care of Mom these last years." Arguments swelled and shrank, old resentments surfacing with every line of the will. George tried to play peacemaker, his voice measured and reasonable, but was quickly swept up in the rising tide. Mr. Brenner kept his tone neutral, answering questions and reminding them of their mother's wishes. "She wanted you to decide together. No one has to move forward today. Take your time." After the reading, Evelyn retreated to the kitchen, hands trembling as she filled the kettle. Margaret followed, voice taut. "She always favored you. I'm not letting you walk away with more than your share." Evelyn shook her head, biting back tears. "This isn't about money, Margaret." Margaret scoffed. "Easy to say when you're comfortable." In the living room, Stuart made calls to his wife, recounting every detail, while George quietly snapped photos of the antiques, for inventory. The house, once the center of childhood joy, now echoed with suspicion and bruised pride. As the rain eased, relatives began to leave in twos and threes. Evelyn wandered the rooms alone, running her hand along banisters and windowsills, remembering Christmases and birthdays, arguments and reconciliations. She paused in her mother's bedroom, the scent of lavender still strong. On the dresser was a photograph, her mother as a young woman, surrounded by her 3 children, all of them smiling. For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to grieve not just for her mother, but for the fragile thing her family had become. By evening, the house was quiet again, but beneath the surface, old wounds had been reopened, and a new uneasy rift had begun to form. The day after the will reading, Evelyn awoke in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling's faint water stain, a mark from some forgotten storm decades ago. The house felt colder, emptier now that so many relatives had departed. Downstairs, she could hear Margaret's clipped voice and the scrape of cutlery on china as breakfast was set. The smell of burnt toast drifted up the stairs, mingling with the perfume of lilies left from the funeral. Evelyn dressed quickly and found Stuart already in the dining room, scrolling through emails, half listening as Margaret updated him on the schedule for the day. "George wants to start inventorying the artwork," Margaret said, pouring coffee with a shaky hand. "He thinks we should get appraisals before we decide anything." Stuart barely looked up. "I told my accountant I'd have answers by Friday. We need to be realistic about taxes." Evelyn joined them at the table, carefully buttering a piece of toast. "It isn't all about money," she said quietly. "We have to think about what Mom wanted." Margaret rolled her eyes, her patience worn thin. "What she wanted is for us to figure this out like adults, which, frankly, we haven't done in years." The phone rang. It was Mr. Brenner, the lawyer, confirming appointments with estate appraisers. The siblings listened in silence as he explained the process. Each major item would be catalogued, valued, and discussed before a decision was made. "It's best if you're all present," he insisted. After breakfast, they began to empty closets and drawers. Arguments sparked over every discovery. "Why are you taking the silver set?" "Mom promised that to me," Margaret accused, pulling a velvet-lined box from Evelyn's hands. "She gave me the tea set for my wedding," Evelyn shot back. Stuart snatched a stack of rare books from the shelf, tucking them under his arm. "I paid for Mom's last hospital stay," he said defensively. "A few books won't make up for that." George entered with an inventory list, diplomatically suggesting a system. "Let's each write down the 3 things we care about most, then negotiate from there." His voice was even, but tension bristled in the room. As the day wore on, old wounds reopened. Evelyn found a box of letters their mother had written, notes of encouragement, apologies after family fights, birthday cards with carefully chosen words. She read them quietly while the others bickered, tears stinging her eyes. By noon, they divided the jewelry and set aside the paintings for appraisal. Lunch was a silent affair, punctuated by glances at phones and the slow clink of cutlery. Afterward, Stuart left for a work call that lasted nearly 2 hours. Margaret retreated to her childhood room, and George wandered the property, photographing every inch of the house. Evelyn wandered out to the garden, breathing in the scent of damp earth and wilting roses. She found a spot under the old maple tree where she and her siblings once built forts and shared secrets. For a moment, the memories were so sharp they hurt. Late afternoon brought another round of tense negotiation. Margaret insisted on keeping the family china, Stuart demanded the coin collection, and George pressed for the car, citing practicality. Evelyn listened, weary, as her siblings grew more defensive, voices rising and falling like a storm that refused to pass. As dusk crept in, the 3 siblings stood together in the living room, surrounded by piles of family history. Some boxed, some still waiting to be claimed. The silence stretched between them, heavy with what had already been lost and what, perhaps, could never be recovered. Margaret finally broke it, her voice low. "Let's just finish. The sooner we're done, the sooner we can move on." Evelyn nodded, but her heart ached. She glanced at the old portrait above the mantel, her parents, young and radiant, full of hope. For a moment, she wondered if they'd ever imagined their legacy would lead to this. The 3rd morning after the will, reading dawned gray and muggy, thunderclouds threatening on the horizon. The siblings gathered around the kitchen table, a clutter of coffee cups, appraisal documents, and fading flower arrangements crowding the space. The air was thick with the exhaustion of too little sleep and too many arguments. George arrived early with folders from the lawyer, quietly reviewing the latest appraisals. Margaret, hair pulled back and jaw set, was already in the dining room, stacking plates and muttering about how many family treasures were still unclaimed. Stuart wandered in, face shadowed with fatigue, cell phone buzzing every few minutes with work updates. Evelyn, worn down by the constant negotiation, tried to keep the peace. She suggested they sit down together, just once, for a proper breakfast, as they'd done on Sunday mornings as children. Reluctantly, everyone agreed. The meal was stilted, but the old rhythm emerged in fragments. Margaret passing the orange juice without a word, Stuart distractedly buttering toast, George straightening the napkins. Evelyn poured coffee and tried to lighten the mood, recalling childhood pranks and family holidays, but laughter felt strained and brittle. After breakfast, they reconvened in the living room. Mr. Brenner arrived to guide them through the next round of decisions. With careful professionalism, he explained the legal implications of each asset, how the house sale would proceed, how taxes would be handled, what to do if they couldn't agree. "Your mother's wish was for you to work together," he reminded them, but the words rang hollow against the undercurrent of resentment in the room. The day became a whirlwind of debates and accusations. Margaret accused Evelyn of manipulating their mother in her final months. Stuart insisted he'd sacrificed the most, claiming that regular visits gave him a greater stake. George, usually the calmest, snapped at Margaret for turning everything into a fight, his patience finally fraying. Tempers flared over small things: a chipped porcelain vase, a set of first-edition books, a faded quilt Margaret claimed Evelyn had hidden away for years. The siblings moved through the house with growing possessiveness, arguments echoing through the halls their mother had tried so hard to fill with love. At one point, Evelyn retreated to the garden for air. She found the maple tree again, its branches sheltering the swing her father built so long ago. She sat for a while, head in her hands, listening to the muffled sounds of her siblings' voices drifting through the open window. Lunch passed with little conversation. They ate on paper plates, picnic-style, the dining room table now covered in papers and labeled boxes. By mid-afternoon, Margaret made a call to her husband, venting her frustrations. Stuart threatened to hire his own lawyer if things weren't settled fairly. George tried to mediate, but every solution he offered only seemed to deepen the divide. In the late afternoon, Mrs. Watkins from next door stopped by with a tray of muffins and a few kind words about their mother. For a moment, the siblings managed politeness, thanking her and asking after the neighborhood. But as soon as the door closed behind her, old wounds reopened. Margaret muttered about people who think they know everything. Stuart rolled his eyes. George retreated to the porch. Evelyn wandered the house, her fingers tracing photos on the walls, birthdays, graduations, holidays long past. She could feel the house itself sigh under the strain, every room filled with memories now overshadowed by disappointment. By nightfall, little progress had been made. Boxes remained unpacked, the most contested items still unclaimed. The siblings retreated to their separate corners, Margaret to her room with a glass of wine, Stuart to the den with his phone, George to the back porch, Evelyn alone in the kitchen, washing dishes as the house grew quiet. She stood at the window, looking out at the darkening yard, and wondered how so much love could have been twisted into something so brittle. For the first time since her mother's passing, Evelyn allowed herself to cry, not just for the loss of her family's matriarch, but for the crumbling of everything that once held them together. Thunder shook the windows overnight, and the storm's heaviness lingered in the morning air. Margaret was up early, already making calls to realtors and appraisers, her voice clipped as she strode from room to room. Stuart shuffled into the kitchen in sweatpants, dark circles under his eyes, pouring coffee and immediately reaching for his phone. George came in last, a stack of legal folders under his arm, jaw set, lips pressed into a line. Evelyn, weary but determined, tried to reintroduce calm. She suggested, "Let's sort through Mom's personal things together. Maybe if we do this room by room, we can find some agreement." Margaret barely looked up. "Agreement? You mean, give in to whatever you and Stuart want?" Stuart retorted, "I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets their fair share. Some of us actually took care of Mom." George raised his voice, uncharacteristically sharp. "This is going nowhere. If we keep fighting, we'll end up in court. Is that what Mom wanted?" No one answered. The question hung over the breakfast table, heavier than the gray clouds pressing against the windows. They spent the morning in their mother's bedroom, sorting through boxes of scarves, old jewelry, and carefully folded letters. Each item triggered a memory, and often an argument. "That's my high school ring," Margaret insisted, snatching a small box from Evelyn. "I found it in the keepsake drawer, along with my bracelet," Evelyn said, holding her ground. "Let her have the ring," George muttered, rubbing his forehead. They divided the jewelry with tense diplomacy, marking the winners and losers in a ledger. Stuart left midway through, muttering about childish nonsense, his phone already to his ear. After lunch, Margaret called a realtor, arranging for the house to be listed by the following week. Evelyn and George wandered through the emptying rooms, debating the fate of furniture, rugs, family portraits. Every item became a new battleground. Evelyn wanted the kitchen table for her own family, George wanted the grandfather clock for his entryway, Margaret demanded the living room painting, citing sentimental value. The house grew emptier with every box packed, yet the siblings seemed only more distant, their conversations clipped and formal. Evenings were spent in separate rooms, Margaret with her lists, Stuart with his laptop, George on the porch, Evelyn in the kitchen, staring at the old recipe box as if it might offer guidance. On the fourth night, a fresh argument erupted over the family silver. Margaret accused Evelyn of hiding pieces. Stuart declared he didn't care anymore and stormed out to walk the neighborhood. George tried to mediate, but his patience wore thin, his voice growing hard. "We're tearing this family apart for things that shouldn't even matter," he said, slamming the lid on a box. Margaret left for her hotel that night, refusing to stay another evening in this toxic house. Stuart left early the next morning, driving hours back to his own family. George lingered on the porch after everyone was gone, staring at the empty driveway, feeling as if the rain would never stop. Evelyn spent the morning alone in the house. She wandered from room to room, dust motes spinning in the weak sunlight. She picked up the family photo from the mantel, a rare image of all four siblings, their parents beaming in the center. She traced each face with her thumb, wishing things could return to the days when laughter echoed in every room. In the silence that followed, Evelyn made tea, sitting by the window as the last storm clouds drifted away. The house felt stripped not only of belongings, but of hope. Its very walls seemed to sag under the weight of broken bonds and unspoken words. That evening, as dusk settled and shadows grew long, Evelyn locked the door behind her for the first time. She stood on the porch, looking back at the house that had been both sanctuary and battleground, and wondered if the family she loved could ever find its way back to one another. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the Harris house with a knot in her stomach. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of cardboard and old flowers. Margaret was already there, her suitcase propped by the door, phone pressed to her ear. George arrived soon after, raincoat damp, carrying a folder stuffed with contracts and final appraisals. Stuart, after much prodding by text, agreed to meet at noon, his voice clipped and irritable over the phone. The realtor came first, a young woman in a bright blazer who walked the property briskly, making notes and murmuring about market potential. Margaret followed her from room to room, correcting her on details, insisting the price be set higher. George hovered in the foyer, reviewing figures, tapping his pen anxiously on the banister. Evelyn followed them, half listening, mind drifting between memories and the cold reality of the sale. By lunchtime, the siblings gathered in the kitchen for what was meant to be their final meeting in the house. The realtor laid out the listing agreement and explained the process. Her words met with nods and impatient glances at watches. Margaret signed first, her signature bold. George added his, steady but tense. Stuart arrived late, rain dripping from his coat, and scrawled his name without looking up. Evelyn hesitated, hand shaking as she wrote her name on the line. As the realtor left, Margaret turned to practicalities. "We'll need to clear the rest of the house by Friday. George, can you arrange movers? Evelyn, you should take anything you want today, otherwise it goes to charity." Stuart rolled his eyes. "Just tell me when I need to pick up the books and Dad's medals. I don't care about the rest." A tense silence fell. They divided the remaining odds and ends, boxes of kitchenware, faded linens, stacks of photo albums. George tried to keep the process civil, but nerves frayed with every passing hour. Margaret criticized the way items were packed. Stuart checked his phone, impatient to leave. Evelyn found herself alone in the attic, sorting through boxes of school awards, old report cards, and forgotten toys. She set aside a few treasures, her mother's patchwork quilt, a letter written in Shakespeare, a small ceramic bird her father once gave her. Each item felt like a goodbye, a fragment of a life slipping away. Downstairs, Margaret and George bickered over the piano. Stuart took a call in the hallway, voice rising in frustration as he explained, "No, I'm not staying for dinner. No, it's not sorted out. Just more of the same." As afternoon turned to evening, the final belongings were carried to cars or stacked for donation. The house echoed with the thud of boxes and the scrape of furniture against bare floors. Margaret was the first to leave, pressing a brief kiss to Evelyn's cheek and promising to call, though neither believed she would, not soon. George lingered, helping Evelyn carry her boxes to the car, offering an awkward hug. Stuart left last, a single wave as he pulled away from the curb, rain splattering the windshield. Evelyn locked the door behind her and stood for a long time on the porch. The sky was low and gray, the yard empty. She pressed her hand to the doorknob, then let go, turning toward her car and the uncertain road ahead. As she drove away, the house receded in the mirror, familiar, loved, and now, finally, empty. The inheritance was decided, the signatures dry, but nothing felt resolved. The silence in the car was as heavy as the distance between her and her siblings, a silence money could never fill. Evelyn returned to her own home that evening, carrying boxes she barely remembered packing. The quiet of her small apartment was jarring after the days of tense voices and echoing footsteps. She set her treasures down in the living room and sat, staring at the blank wall, exhaustion flooding her. The phone buzzed, a group message from Margaret. House is listed. Final walkthrough Friday, 10 a.m. Movers confirmed. George replied with a curt, "Thanks. I'll bring the inventory forms." Stuart didn't answer at all. Evelyn unpacked slowly, finding places for the quilt, the ceramic bird, and the handful of family photos she'd rescued. She spent the evening making tea, eating a dinner she barely tasted, letting the silence wrap around her. Later, she called her husband Michael, who listened quietly as she recounted the last few days, offering gentle encouragement and a reminder to rest. "It's all just things," he said softly. "But I know it's more to you." Sleep came fitfully. Evelyn dreamed of wandering the Harris house, rooms full of laughter and slamming doors, voices echoing down empty halls. She woke before dawn, heart aching, the image of her mother's face vivid and unreachable. Over the next days, the siblings kept contact to a minimum. Margaret emailed details about the listing and mover schedule, her tone brisk. George sent a link to the online inventory, requesting signatures for one last document. Stuart called only to confirm what time to collect his boxes, voice-clipped and businesslike. Friday's final walkthrough brought them together one last time. The house, stripped of nearly everything, felt cavernous. Margaret marched from room to room, ticking boxes on her clipboard. George double-checked closets and garage shelves, quietly moving aside a forgotten box of books. Stuart arrived late, collected his medals and books without a word, and waited by the door. Evelyn lingered in the backyard, standing beneath the old maple tree. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of grass and distant flowers. For a moment, she let herself remember birthday parties, summer picnics, the feel of her mother's arms wrapped around her. Inside, the others finished their checks. Margaret called, "We're locking up now, Evelyn." She entered through the back door, pausing when she saw her sister beneath the tree. Margaret's voice softened. "You all right?" Evelyn nodded, blinking back tears. "I just needed a moment." Margaret hovered, uncertain. She glanced at the house, then at her sister. "It's done, Ev. There's nothing left to fight over." Evelyn nodded again, wishing it were true. They returned to the front, where George handed over the keys to the realtor. He offered each sibling a stiff hug. Stuart got into his car without a word, driving away with the same distance he'd brought to every conversation. Margaret hugged Evelyn tightly, too tightly, then walked away, her heels clicking on the path. Evelyn was last to leave. She locked the door, slipped the key through the realtor's mail slot, and stood on the porch for a final moment. The house was silent, waiting for strangers to make it theirs. Driving away, Evelyn glanced in the mirror. The road behind her was empty, but she felt the weight of all she'd left behind: love, resentment, memories, and the last fragile thread of family. Her heart ached, but she drove on, the future uncertain, the past already fading in the rain-streaked glass. The weeks after the house sale blurred into a stream of paperwork and muted messages. Evelyn spent her evenings poring over documents, tax forms, transfer statements, final bills for repairs and movers. Each envelope and email was a reminder of what had been lost and what little had been gained. Margaret was relentless in her communication, forwarding spreadsheets and reminders, scheduling phone conferences to finalize everything. She kept a civil tone, but her emails lacked warmth, just bullet points and requests for signatures. George, too, maintained distance, his messages short, polite, focused on deadlines. Stuart was largely silent, signing his forms, sending back checks, and refusing any invitation to call. One Saturday morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a mug of tea cooling by her elbow, the final settlement statement in her hand. The inheritance, when split, seemed both generous and hollow. She remembered how their mother used to say, "Money can't hold a family together," and wondered if she'd ever truly believed it until now. To distract herself, Evelyn joined Michael at the farmer's market, letting the crowd and the noise wash over her. They bought apples and honey, sat on a bench to share a pastry, and talked about plans for a small garden. Yet in the back of Evelyn's mind, her siblings' faces flickered, Margaret's sharp determination, George's tired patience, Stuart's distant stare. Back home, she sorted the last of her inheritance, the quilt, the photos, the small ceramic bird, placing each carefully in her favorite cabinet. She leafed through the old family photo album, stopping at images of birthday cakes, muddy shoes, her mother laughing in the garden. The weight of absence pressed on her, not just of her mother, but of the family they'd once been. Later that week, Evelyn received a thank-you card from a charity that had collected the housewares and furniture. It was a simple note, but it gave her a glimmer of comfort. At least something good had come from the endless sorting and dividing. Michael encouraged her to invite Margaret or George for dinner. Evelyn hesitated, uncertain of the right words, but sent a message to both. "If you'd like to come for supper next week, I'd love to see you. No talk of lawyers, just a meal together." Margaret replied, "I'll check my calendar." George sent, "Thank you, I'll try." Stuart did not reply. On Sunday, Evelyn took a walk through the park, watching families gathered around picnic tables, children chasing each other across the grass. She felt the ache of what her own family had become, split by grief and greed, haunted by all the love that had gone unspoken. At home, she sat by the window, knitting a scarf for the coming winter. She let her hands move by habit, watching the world outside grow darker, the seasons shifting around her. The phone was silent, the house still, and Evelyn wondered if, one day, the wounds left by money and loss might ever heal. Autumn settled quietly over the city, gold leaves drifting across sidewalks, the days growing shorter and the air carrying a hint of winter. Evelyn found herself slowing down, drawn to simple routines: morning walks, homemade soup, evenings curled up with a book or her knitting while Michael read nearby. She heard little from her siblings. Margaret sent a holiday card, all business, with a printed photo of her children and a brief note about hoping the new year brings peace. George called once, his voice gentle but distant, asking about her health and promising, "Maybe next spring we can visit." Stuart remained silent, sending only a forwarding address for future tax statements. One afternoon, Evelyn cleaned out her hall closet and came upon the box of family photos and keepsakes from the Harris house. She spread them on the coffee table, snapshots of childhood birthdays, camping trips, long-ago holidays when everyone had still gathered together. She let herself linger on each image, recalling the jokes, the arguments, the love that had once seemed indestructible. She called her husband into the room, sharing stories, laughter, and even a few tears. Michael listened, holding her hand as she recounted the ways money had sliced through what her mother had tried so hard to protect. "You did your best," he said. "You still are." That weekend, Evelyn baked her mother's lemon pound cake and brought it to the community center's potluck. She watched other families talk and laugh, children darting under tables, elders reminiscing in quiet corners. Evelyn found comfort among them, a gentle reminder that even broken ties could be mended by kindness, if not with her siblings, then with others willing to gather. One evening, as the first frost dusted the window, Evelyn received a letter from Margaret. The words were careful but softer. "I hope you're well. I miss Mom too. Maybe next summer we can visit the lake together. Take care, Ev." Evelyn replied with hope but no expectation, sending a recipe for their mother's apple pie and a photo of the old quilt, now gracing her own bed. She no longer waited for her phone to ring. Instead, she poured her energy into her own home and circle of friends, letting go of what she could not fix. Yet every now and then, she returned to the keepsakes and photographs, holding them for a while before setting them down, grateful for the love that had once been, even if it had faded. On a bright, cold morning, Evelyn stood at her window, sipping tea as sunlight filled the kitchen. The past would always linger, but she felt lighter now, anchored not by bitterness, but by the gentle certainty that she had chosen love, even when money tried to take it all away.